Quick recap. The chronicles of the ancient kings of Persia, who extended their empire into the Indies and as far as China, tell of a powerful king of that family, Shandon, who became king of Samarkand. Now one night Shandon found his queen with another man. In despair he slew them both, and he launched his nation on a path of great destruction. Shandon resolved to wed a new woman, every day, and after one day and night with her, he would slay her. Well, this took a great toll on the nation, and one woman, Scheherazade, decided to take action to sway the course of events and save countless lives. Scheherazade therefore put herself in the hands of the king as his next wife, even knowing that the Sultan's vizier, her own father, would be ordered to kill her the next morning. The Sultan was much surprised at this sacrifice, which the Grand Vizier proposed in making. "How could you resolve," said the Sultan, "to bring me your own daughter?" "Sir, it is her own offer." But do not deceive yourself, Vizier. Tomorrow, when I put Scheherazade into your hands, I expect you will take away her life, and if you fail, I swear that you both shall die. Scheherazade now set about preparing to appear before the Sultan. But before she went, she took her sister, Dinarzade, apart, and said to her, "My dear sister, I have need of your help in a matter of great importance, and I must pray you do not deny it me. As soon as I come to the Sultan, I will beg him to allow you to be in the bride chamber, that I may enjoy your company for the last time. If I obtain this favor, as I hope to do, remember, sister, to wake me tomorrow about an hour before dawn, and to address me in words like these. My sister, if you be not asleep, I pray you that till daybreak you will relate one of the delightful stories which you have read so many. Immediately I will begin to tell you one story, and I hope by this means to deliver the city from the consternation it is in." So Dinarzade answered that she would fulfill her sister's wishes. When the hour for retiring came, the Grand Vizier conducted Scheherazade to the palace and took his leave. As soon as the Sultan was left alone with her, he ordered her to uncover her face, and found it so beautiful that he was charmed with her. But perceiving her to be in tears, he asked her the reason. "Sir," answered Scheherazade, "I have a sister who loves me tenderly, and whom I love, and I could wish that she might be allowed to pass the night in this chamber, that I might see her and bid her farewell. Will you be pleased to grant me the comfort of giving her this last testimony of my affection?" Shahzadan having consented, Dinarzade was sent for and came with all diligence. The Sultan passed the night with Scheherazade upon an elevated couch, and Dinarzade, her sister, slept on a mattress prepared for her near the foot of the bed. An hour before day, Dinarzade awoke, and failed not to speak as her sister had ordered her. Scheherazade, instead of answering her sister, asked leave of the Sultan to grant Dinarzade's request. Shahzadan consented. Addressing herself to the Sultan, Scheherazade began as follows. There once lived, sir, a fisherman who was old and feeble, and so poor that he could barely obtain food for himself, and for the wife and the 3 children who made up his family. He went out very early every morning to his work, and he made an absolute rule that he would throw his nets only 4 times a day. "Good morning, Herndon." One morning he set out before the moon had set, and when he got to the seashore he undressed himself and threw his nets. In drawing them to land, he felt them drag heavily, and he began to imagine he would have an excellent haul, at which he was much pleased. But on pulling up the nets, he found that instead of fish he had caught only the carcass of an ass. He was much vexed and afflicted at having so bad a haul. And so when he had mended his nets, which the weight of the ass had torn in many places, he cast them a second time into the sea. He again found considerable resistance in drawing them up, and again he thought they were filled with fish, but great was his disappointment, you must see, when he discovered that only a large basket filled with sand and mud. "Oh, fortune!" he exclaimed, with a melancholy voice, and in great distress. "Cease to be angry with me. Persecute not an unfortunate being who supplicates thee to spare him. I came from home to seek for life, and thou threaten me with death. I have no other trade, O fortune, by which I can subsist, and even with all my toil, I can hardly supply the pressing wants of my family. But I am wrong to complain of thee. that takest a pleasure in deluding the virtuous, and leavest good men in obscurity, while thou favourest the wicked, and exaltest those who possess no virtue to recommend them. Having thus vented his complaints against fortune, he angrily threw the basket aside, and washing his nets from mud and slime, he threw the nets in for a third time. He brought up only stones, shells, and filth. It's impossible to describe his despair, which now almost deprived him of his senses. There was not even a bit of hair left there now. The day now began to break, and like a good Mussulman, he did not neglect his prayers, to which he added the following supplication. Thou knowest, O Lord, and I throw my nets only 4 times a day. 3 times have I thrown them into the sea, without any profit for my labour. 1 more cast alone remains, and I entreat thee to render the sea favourable, as thou formerly didst to Moses. When the fisherman had finished his prayer, he threw his nets for the 4th time. Again he supposed he had caught a great quantity of fish, as they were just as heavy as before. He nevertheless found none, but discovered a vase of yellow copper, which seemed from its weight to be filled with something, and he observed that this vase was shut up and stoppered with lead, on which there was an impression of a seal. Aye, I will sell this to a founder, he said joyfully, and with the money I shall get for it I will purchase a measure of corn. When he had examined the vase on all sides, he now shook it, to judge of its contents by the sound. He could hear nothing, and this, together with the impression of the seal on the lead, made him think it was filled with something very valuable. To decide the question, he took his knife. He cut it open without much difficulty. He directly turned the top downwards, and was much surprised to find nothing come out. He set it down before him, and while he watched closely, there issued from this vase, from it so thick a smoke that he was obliged to step back a few paces. Now this smoke by degrees rose almost to the clouds themselves, and spread itself over the sea and land, appearing like a thick fog. The fisherman, as may easily be imagined, was much surprised at this sight. And when the smoke had all come out from the vase, it again collected itself and became a solid body, taking the shape of a genie, twice as large as of any of the giants. At the appearance of this huge monster, the fisherman wished to run away, but his fear was so great he was unable to move. Solomon, Solomon, cried the genie, great prophet of Allah, I pardon, I beseech thee. I will never more oppose thy will, but will obey all thy commands. The fisherman had no sooner heard these words spoken by the genie than he regained his courage and said, Proud spirit, what is thou sayest? Solomon, the prophet of the Most High, has been dead more than 1800 years. Tell me then thy history, genie, and wherefore thou hast been shut up in this vase. To this speech the genie, looking disdainfully at the fisherman, answered, Speak more civilly. Thou art very bold to call me a proud spirit. Right, perhaps then, returned the fisherman, it would be more civil to call thee a bird of good omen. I tell thee, said the genie, speak to me more civilly before I kill thee. And for what reason, prayest, wilt thou kill me? Asked the fisherman. Hast thou already forgotten that I have set thee at liberty? I remember it very well, returned the genie. But thou shalt not prevent my destroying thee, and I will grant thee one favour. Favour? What is that? Asked the fisherman. It is, replied the genie, to permit thee to choose the manner of thy death. But in what, resumed the fisherman, in what have I offended thee? Is it thus thou dost recompense me for the good service I have done thee? I cannot treat thee otherwise, said the genie, and to convince thee of it, attend to my history. I am one of those spirits rebelled against the sovereignty of Allah. All the other genii acknowledged the great Solomon, the prophet of God, and submitted to him. Sakar and myself were the only ones who disdained to humble ourselves. In revenge for my contumacy, this powerful monarch charged Asaf, the son of Barakia, his first minister, to come and seize me. And this was done, and Asaf captured me and brought me by force before the throne of the king, his master. Solomon, the son of David, commanded me to quit my mode of life, acknowledge his authority, and submit to his laws. I haughtily refused to obey him, and expose myself to his resentment rather than take the oath of fidelity and submission which he required of me. In order, therefore, to punish me, he confined me in this copper vase, and to prevent me forcing my way out, he put the leaden cover of the impression of his seal on which the great name of Allah is engraven. Thereupon he gave the vase to one of those genii who obeyed him, and ordered the spirit to throw me into the sea, which, to my great sorrow, was done directly. During the first period of my captivity, I swore that if any man delivered me before the first 100 years were past, I would make him rich even after his death. Alas, that time elapsed, and no one released me. During the 2nd century of my imprisonment, I swore that if anyone sent me free, I would discover to him all the treasures of the earth. Still, no help came. During the 3rd, I promised to make my deliverer a most powerful monarch, to be always at his command, and to grant him every day any 3 requests he chose to make. Yet this century, like the former, passed away, and I remained in bondage. Enraged at last to be so long a prisoner, I swore that I would without mercy kill the person who should release me, and that the only favour I'd grant him would be the choice of what manner of death he preferred. Since therefore thou hast come here today, and hast delivered me, fix upon whatever kind of death thou wilt. And the fisherman was much aggrieved at this speech. But how unfortunate am I come to hear and render so great a service to such an ungrateful creature as you? Consider, I entreat thee, thy injustice, and revoke thine unreasonable oath. Pardon me, and Allah will in like manner pardon thee. If thou wilt generously suffer me to live, he will defend thee from all attempts and that will be made against thy life. No, answered the genie, thy death is inevitable. Determine only how I shall kill thee. The fisherman was in great distress at finding the genie thus resolved on his death, and not so much on his own account as on that of his 3 children, for he anticipated with anguish the wretched state to which his death would reduce them. He still endeavoured to appease the genie. Alas, he cried, have pity on me, in consideration of what I have done for thee. I have already told thee, replied the genie. You will have sound in only one grid, not both, and that is for that very reason I am obliged to take thy life. Well, it is very strange that thou art determined to return evil for good. The proverb says that he who does good to him that does not deserve it is always ill rewarded. I did think, I own, that it was false, because nothing is more contrary to reason and the rights of society, yet I find it too cruelly true. Let us lose no more time, cried the genie. Thy arguments will not alter my resolution. Make haste, and tell me how thou wilt die. Hello, Kitely folks. Inworldz crashed. Well, I crashed in Inworldz, so one moment whilst I Oh, you too? Ah, right, the whole place crashed. Well, that's good to know it wasn't me. All right, there we go. Okay. So, the genie had a bunch of problems, and he pulled, the fisherman pulled up a bunch of junk out of the ocean, finally got this big old bottle, this vase-looking thing, kind of like Barbara Eden used to live in, and he opened it up, and this big old nasty genie came out and said, I'm going to kill you! And the fisherman said, don't kill me, dude, I got kids, I'm trying to make a living, what's your problem, man? And that's kind of where we are now. The fisherman says, the proverb says that no good deed goes unpunished. He who does good to him that does not deserve it is always well rewarded. I did think, I own, that this was false, being because nothing is more contrary to reason and the rights of society, yet I find it too cruelly true. Let us lose no more time, cried the genie, and then the worlds crashed. Thy arguments will not alter my resolution. Make haste, and tell me how thou wilt die. Necessity is the spur to invention, and the fisherman thought of a stratagem. Well, since then I cannot escape death, I submit to the will of God. But before I choose the manner of my death, I conjure thee by the great name of Allah, which is graven upon the seal of the prophet Solomon, the son of David, to answer me truly a question I am going to put to thee, genie. When the genie found that he should be compelled to answer positively, he trembled, and said to the fisherman, Ask what thou wilt, and make haste. As soon as the genie had promised to speak the truth, the fisherman said to him, I wish to know whether thou wilt really want in that vase. Darest thou swear it by the great name of Allah?
Yes, I do swear by the great name of Allah that I most certainly was in that vase.
In truth, replied the fisherman, I cannot believe thee. This vase cannot contain one of my feet. How then can it hold thy whole body?
I swear to thee notwithstanding, replied the monster, that I was there just as thou seest me now. Wilt thou not believe me after the solemn oath I have taken?
No, truly, retorted the fisherman, I shall not believe thee unless I see it with mine own eyes. Immediately the form of the genie began to change into smoke, and to extend itself, as before, over both the shore and the sea, and then collecting itself began to enter the vase, and continued to do so with a slow and equal motion, till nothing remained without. A voice immediately issued forth, saying,
Now, thou unbelieving fisherman, art thou convinced now that I am in this vase?
But instead of answering the genie, the fisherman immediately took the leaden cover and clapped it over the vase. Genie, it is now thy turn to ask pardon and choose what sort of death is most agreeable to thee. But no, it is better that I should throw thee again into the sea, and I will build on the very spot where thou art cast a house upon the shore, in which I will live, to warn all fishermen that shall come and throw their nets not to fish up so wicked a genie as thou art, that thou takest an oath to kill him who shall set them at liberty. At this insulting speech, the enraged genie tried his utmost to get out of the vase, but in vain, for the impression of the seal of Solomon the prophet and son of David prevented him. Knowing then that the fisherman had the advantage over him, he began to conceal his rage.
Take heed,
said he in a softened tone.
Take heed what thou dost, O fisherman. Whatever I said was merely in jest, that thou should not take it seriously.
O genie, answered the fisherman, thou who wert a moment ago the greatest of all the genii art now the most insignificant, and suppose not that thy flattering speeches will avail thee anything. Thou shalt assuredly return to the sea, and if thou hast passed so much time there, thou hast asserted, thou mayest as well remain to the day of judgment. I entreated thee in the name of God not to take my life, as thou hast rejected my prayers. I ought to reject thine likewise. The genie tried every argument to move the fisherman's pity, but in vain. I conjure thee to open this vase. If thou givest me liberty again, thou shalt have reason to be satisfied with my gratitude. Thou art too treacherous for me. I will not trust thee. I should deserve to lose my life, said the fisherman, were I so foolish as to put it in thy power a second time. For thou wouldst probably treat me as the Greek king treated Dubon, the physician. I will tell thee that story, genie. In the country of Zuman in Persia there lived a king whose subjects were of Greek origin. The king was sorely afflicted with leprosy, and his physicians had unsuccessfully tried every remedy they knew, when a very learned physician called Dubon arrived at the court. And by the way, we skipped over to the next story called The History of the Greek King and Dubon the Physician. See how they just kind of run and run? We've had complaints sometimes of cliffhangers. I think these stories, they just never really end, so there is no cliffhanger. So it's kind of the other direction. Anyway, he had acquired his profound learning by studying different authors in Greek, Latin, Persian, Arabic, Turkish, Syriac, and Hebrew languages. And besides having a consummate knowledge of philosophy, he was also well acquainted with the good and bad properties of all kinds of plants and drugs. As soon as he was informed of the king's illness, and heard the physicians had given their master up, he dressed himself as neatly as possible and obtained an audience with the king. Sir, I know that all physicians who have attended your majesty have been unable to remove your leprosy, but if you will do me the honor to accept of my services, I will engage to cure you without medicines or ointments. Now the king, pleased with this proposal, replied, If thou art really so skilful as thou pretendest, I promise to shower wealth on thee and thy posterity. In addition to the presents thou shalt be my first favourite. But dost thou tell me in earnest that thou wilt remove my leprosy without making me swallow any potions or applying any remedy externally? Ah, yes, said the physician. I flatter myself I shall succeed with the help of God, and tomorrow I will begin my cure. So Dubon returned to his house. He made a sort of racket, or a bat, with a hollow in the middle, to admit the drug he meant to use. That being done, he also prepared a sort of round ball, or a bowl, in the manner that seemed best. And in the following day he presented himself before the king, and, prostrating himself at the monarch's feet, kissed the ground before him. Duban then rose, and having made a profound reverence, he told the king that he must ride on horseback to the place where he was accustomed to play at the bowls. The king did as he was recommended, and when he had reached the bowling green, the physician approached him and, putting his hand into the bat, which had been prepared, said, "Wow, that's kind of fun, huh?" Firestorm crashed again at Inworldz. Can't tell you why. Okay. Okay, so real quick recap. There's this king guy, and he's got leprosy, and his skin's falling off and stuff. And then there's this doctor guy named Duban who said, "Hey, dude, I can fix that for you." And the king said, "Hey, if you fix it, I'll give you all kinds of pretty girls in gold and stuff. But I don't want to take any pills, okay? Because they'll suck. They stuck in my throat and make me cough." And the physician said, "Yeah, okay, you don't have to take anything. But here, take this ball and this bat and go play ball like you like to. Go get in your horse and go play a game or two." And the king said, "Okay." And he spurred his horse after the ball until he struck it. And it was sent back to him by the officers who were playing with him, and he struck it again. And thus the game continued for a considerable time, till he found his hand as well as his whole body thoroughly heated, and the remedy in the bat began to operate as the physician had prophesied. The king then ceased playing, and returned to the palace, bathed, and observed very punctually all the directions that had been given him. He soon found the good effects of the prescription of the physician, for when he arose the next morning, he perceived with equal surprise and joy that his leprosy was entirely cured, and that his body was as clear as if he had never been attacked by that malady. As soon as he was dressed, he went into the audience chamber where he mounted his throne. He received the congratulations of all his courtiers who had assembled on that day, and partly to gratify their curiosity and partly to testify to their joy at the master's recovery. Duban entered, and he went to prostrate himself at the foot of the throne with his face towards the ground. The king, when he saw him, called to him and made him sit by his side, and pointing him out to the assembly, gave him in that public way all the praise the physician so well deserved. Nor did the king stop here, for at a grand entertainment at the court of that day, he placed the physician at his own table to dine with him alone. Now, the Greek king, continued the fisherman. Remember, this is the fisherman telling the story to the genie who's in the bottle about to be thrown back into the ocean. The Greek king, continued the fisherman, was not satisfied with admitting the physician to his own table. Towards evening, when the courtiers were about to depart, he caused him to be dressed in a long, rich robe resembling that which the courtiers usually wore in the king's presence. In addition, he made him a present of 2,000 sequins. For the next few days he did nothing but caress his new favorite. In short, this prince, thinking he could never repay the obligations he owed to the skilful physician, was continually conferring on him some fresh proof of his gratitude. The king had a grand vizier who was avaricious, envious, and prone by nature to every species of crime. This man, I think I used to work for him. Hell, I think I still work for him. Anyway, this man observed with malicious fury the presents which had been bestowed upon this physician, whose great character and merit he was determined to lessen and destroy in the mind of the king. To accomplish this purpose, he went to the monarch, and he said in private that he had some intelligence of the greatest moment to communicate. The king asked him what it was. "Sir, it is very dangerous for a monarch to place confidence in a man of whose fidelity he is not assured. While you overwhelm the physician Duban with your favors, and bestow all this kindness and regard upon him, you are ignorant, your highness, that he is a traitor who has introduced himself into the court in order to assassinate you."
"What is this you dare tell me?" cried the king. "Recollect to whom you speak, and you advance an assertion which I shall not easily believe."
"O king, I am accurately informed of what I have the honor to present to you. Do not therefore continue to repose such a dangerous confidence in Duban. If your majesty is, as it were, in a dream, it is time to awake, for I repeat, the physician Duban has travelled from the farthest part of Greece in his own country, a slippery fellow he is, being from Greece, solely to carry out the horrible designs that I have mentioned."
No, vizier. I am sure this man, whom you consider a A hypocrite and a traitor is one of the most virtuous and best of men. There is no one in the world whom I respect so much. You know by what remedy, or rather by what miracle, he cured me of leprosy. If he had sought my life, why did he thus save it? Cease then from endeavoring to instill unjust suspicions into my mind, Vizier, for instead of listening to them, I now inform you that from this very day I bestow upon him a pension of 1,000 sequins a month. That's like Izzy's or Kitely credits, for the rest of his life, only a lot more. And were I to share all my riches, even my kingdoms with him, I could never sufficiently repay what he has done for me. I see the reason of this. His virtue excites your envy, Vizier, but do not suppose that I shall suffer myself to be prejudiced against him.
Now, the Greek king was correct to trust the physician Dubon, but the king's vizier convinced him otherwise. And eventually, upon executing Dubon, the Greek king was killed for his betrayal. Though the fisherman feared a similar betrayal by the genie, now for the second time, the genie kept his promise, and upon obtaining his liberty again, the genie instructed the fisherman to cast his nets and sell the fish he would catch to the sultan, who, because of the fish's strange colors, rewarded the fisherman with more money than the fisherman had ever beheld at once. The mystery of the fisherman's colored fish, however, compelled the sultan to set out on his own to satisfy his curiosity as the cause of this event. On his journey, the sultan came across a castle, completely abandoned except for a sad young man seated on a throne. The sultan, touched with compassion at the youth's condition, requested him to relate the cause of such sorrow. Alas, my lord, can I be otherwise than sorrowful, or can these eyes ever cease from shedding tears? With these words he lifted up his robe, and the sultan perceived he was a man only to his waist, and from thence to his feet he had been changed into black marble. I was scared about that for a minute, what he was going to be from the waist down. The sultan's surprise may be readily imagined when he saw the deplorable state of the young man. What you show me fills me with horror, but at the same time excites my interest. I am impatient to learn your history, which must no doubt be very singular, and I am convinced that the lake and the fish have some connection with it. I entreat you, therefore, to relate to me now your story, and indeed you may find consolation in doing so, for the unhappy often experience some relief in imparting the tale of their sorrows. Then I will not refuse you this satisfaction, replied the young man, although I cannot relate my history without renewing the most dreadful grief. I must forewarn you to prepare your ears and your mind, and even your eyes, for something that passes all belief. That brings us to the history of the young king of the Black Isles. I must inform you, began the young man, that my father, who was named Mahmud, the king of this state, it is the kingdom of the Black Isles, you see, and it takes its name from the 4 small neighboring mountains that were formerly islands, and the capital in which my father dwelt was situated on the spot which is now occupied by yonder lake. You will hear how these changes took place as I proceed with my history. The king, my father, died at the age of 70 years. Immediately upon mounting his throne, I married, and the person whom I chose as a partner of my state was my cousin. Incensed! I had every reason to be satisfied with the proofs of affection I received from her, and I returned my regard with equal tenderness. Our union produced unmixed happiness for 5 years, but at the end of that time I began to perceive that the queen, my cousin, no longer loved me. One day after dinner, when she had gone to bathe, I felt inclined to sleep, and threw myself on a sofa. 2 of the queen's women, who happened to be in the room, seated themselves, one at my head, the other at my feet, to fan me, as much to refresh me with cool air as to keep off the flies which might have disturbed my slumbers. Those 2 women, supposing me asleep, began to talk in whispers, but my eyes were only closed, and I overheard their whole conversation. "It is not a pity," said one of them to the other, "is it not, that the queen does not love our king, who is such an amiable prince?" "Oh, surely it is, and I cannot conceive why she goes out every night and leaves him. Does he not perceive it?" "Oh, how will he perceive it? Every night she mixes in his drink the juice of a certain herb, which makes him sleep all night so profoundly that she has time to go wherever she likes, and when at break of day she returns to him, she awakes him by passing a particular scent under his nose." Now you may judge my astonishment at this speech as I lay there, and how I felt when I heard it. Nevertheless, I had sufficient command over myself to suppress my emotions. I pretended to awake and gave no sign of having heard anything. Presently the queen returned from the bath. We supped together. Before we went to bed, she presented me with a cup of water, which it was usual for me to take. But instead of drinking it, I approached a window that was open and threw it out unperceived by her. I then returned the cup into her hands, that she might suppose I had drunk the contents. We soon retired to rest, and shortly afterwards, supposing that I was asleep, my queen got up with very little precaution, even said aloud, "Sleep, I would that thou mightest never wake any more." She dressed herself quickly and left the chamber. So soon as the queen was gone, I rose up and I threw on my clothes as quickly as possible, and taking my scimitar, I followed her so closely that I heard her footsteps just before me. I regulated my steps by hers, walking softly for fear of being heard. She passed through several doors, which opened by virtue of some magic word she pronounced. The last she opened was that of the garden which she entered. I stopped at this door that she might not see me while she crossed the lawn, and following her with my eyes, as well as the obscurity of night would permit, I remarked that she went into a little wood, which was bounded by a thick hedge. I repaired thither by another way, and hiding myself behind the hedge that skirted one of the paths, I perceived that she was now walking with a man. I did not fail to listen attentively to their discourse, when I heard what follows. "I do not," said the queen to her companion, "I do not deserve your reproaches for my want of diligence. You well know the reason of it. But if all the tokens of love which I have hitherto given to you are not sufficient to persuade you of my sincerity, why, I am ready to give you still more convincing proofs. You have only to command. You know my power. I will, if you wish it before the sun rises, change this great city and this beautiful palace into frightful ruins, which shall be inhabited by only wolves and owls and ravens. Shall I transport all the stones with which these walls are so strongly built beyond the Mount Caucasus, and the farther the boundaries of the habitable world? You have only to speak to me, and all this place shall be transformed." Well, as the queen finished this speech to this man, she and her lover reached the end of the walk, turning to enter another, and passed before me. I had already drawn my scimitar, and as the man walked past me, I struck him on the neck, and he fell. I believed I had killed him, and satisfied such was the case, I retired precipitately, and without discovering myself to the queen, whom I wished to spare, as she was my cousin. Although her lover's wound was mortal, she yet contrived by her magic art to preserve him in a kind of existence which can be called neither death nor life. As I traversed the garden to return to the palace, I heard the queen weeping bitterly, and I judged her grief by her cries. I was not sorry to have left him alive. When I reached my chamber, I returned to bed, and satisfied with punishment I had inflicted on the wretch who had offended me, I fell asleep. On awaking the next morning, I found the queen by my side. Now I cannot say whether she was in real or feigned sleep, but I got up without disturbing her and retired to my closet, where I finished dressing. I afterwards attended the council, and on my return the queen, dressed in mourning state, with her hair dishevelled and torn, presented herself before me. "My lord, I come to entreat your majesty not to be displeased at the state in which you now see me. I have just received intelligence of 3 events which occasion the grief I so strongly feel that I can scarcely express it, my lord." "What are these events, madam?" I inquired. The death of the queen, my beloved mother," she replied. "That of the king, my father, who was killed in battle, and of my brother, who fell down a precipice." Now I was not sorry that she had invented this pretext to conceal the true cause of her affliction, and I concluded that she did not suspect me of having been the murderer of her lover. "Madam," said I do not blame your sorrow. On the contrary, I assure you that I sympathize in the cause. I should be much surprised if you were not affected by such a loss. Weep, weep, for your tears are undoubted proof of the kindness in your heart. I hope that, nevertheless, that time and philosophy will restore to you your wonted cheerfulness." And so she retired to her apartments, and abandoning herself to her grief, she passed a whole year there, weeping and bewailing the death of her lover. At the expiration of that time, she requested my permission to build for herself in the centre of the palace a mausoleum, in which... Sorry, I watched Haunted Mansion the other night, and I can't read mausoleum without hearing mausoleum. She built in the center of the palace a mausoleum in which she said she designed to pass the remainder of her days. I did not refuse. She erected a magnificent palace with a dome which may be seen from this place, and she called it the Palace of Tears. When it was completed, she had her lover removed and brought to this mausoleum from the place whither she had transported him on the night I wounded him. She had till that period preserved his life by giving him certain potions which she administered herself, and continued to give him daily after his removal to the Palace of Tears. All her enchantments, however, did not avail much, for he was not only unable to walk or stand, but had also lost the use of his speech, and gave no signs of life but by looks. Although the queen had only the consolation of seeing him and saying to him all the tender things that her love inspired, yet she constantly paid him 2 long visits every day. I was well acquainted with this circumstance, but I pretended to be ignorant of it. Moved by curiosity, I went one day to the Palace of Tears to know how the queen passed her time there, and concealing myself in a place where I could see and hear what passed, I heard her speak these words to her lover. "Oh, what heavy affliction to me to see you in this state! I share with you all the agonies you endure. Oh, but dearest life, I am always speaking to you, and yet you return no answer. How long will this distressing silence continue? Speak but once, and I am satisfied. Alas, these moments that I pass with you, endeavoring to mitigate your sufferings, are the happiest of my life. I cannot exist away from you, and I should prefer the pleasure of seeing you continually to the empire of the whole universe." Now, this speech, which was frequently interrupted by tears and sobs, at length exhausted my patience. I could no longer remain in concealment, but approaching her, exclaimed, "Madam, you have wept enough. It is now time to have done with the grief which dishonors us both. You forget what you owe to me, as well as what you owe to yourself." "Sir, if you still retain any regard for me, I entreat you to leave me to my sorrows, which time can neither diminish nor relieve." I endeavored, but in vain, to bring her to a sense of her duty, to finding all my arguments only increased her obstinacy. At last I desisted and left her. She continued to visit her lover every day, and for 2 years she was inconsolable. I went a second time to the Palace of Tears while she was there. I hid myself as before, and I heard her say, "It is now 3 years since you have spoken to me, nor do you return the tokens of affection and fondness which I offer you in my complaints and sighs. Is it from insensibility or disdain? Hast thou, O tomb, destroyed that excess of tenderness which you bore me? Hast thou closed forever those dear eyes which beamed with love and were all my delight? No, I cannot think it. Rather, let me say, thou art become the depository of the rarest treasure the world ever saw." Now I confess to you, my lord, that I was enraged at these words. And indeed, this cherished lover, this adored mortal, was not the kind of man you would imagine. He was a black Indian, one of the original inhabitants of this country. I was, as I have said, so enraged at this speech that I suddenly showed myself, and apostrophizing the tomb as my wife had done, I said, "Why dost thou not, O tomb, swallow up this monster who is disgusting to human nature? Rather, why dost thou not, O tomb, consume both the lover and his mistress?" Now, as soon as I had spoken these words, the queen, who was seated near her former lover, started up like a fury. "Ah, wretch! It is you who have been the cause of my grief. Think not that I am ignorant of your doings. I have already dissembled too long. It was your barbarous hand which reduced the object of my affections to the miserable state he is now in. And have you the cruelty to come and insult my despair?" "Yes," exclaimed I, confronting her, transported with anger. "I have chastised the monster as he deserved, and I ought to treat thee in the same manner. I repent that I have not already done it, for thou hast too long abused my goodness." As I said this, I drew my scimitar. I raised my arm to punish her. "Moderate thy rage," she said with a disdainful smile, and she looked at me with an air of indifference. After a moment she pronounced some words which I did not understand, and added, "By virtue of my enchantments I command thee from this moment to become half marble, half man." Now immediately, my lord, I was changed to what you see, already dead among the living, and yet still living among the dead. As soon as this cruel enchantress, for she is unworthy of the title of queen, had thus transformed me, and by means of her magic had conveyed me to this apartment. She destroyed my capital, which had been flourishing and well inhabited. She annihilated the palaces, public places, markets. She turned the whole region into a lake or pond, and she rendered the country, as you may perceive it, quite a desert. The 4 sorts of fish which are in the lake are 4 different classes of inhabitants who profess different religions and inhabited the capital. The white fish are the Muslims, the red, the Persians, the fire worshippers, the blue, the Christians, and the yellow, the Jews. The 4 little hills were 4 islands, which originally gave the kingdom its name. I was informed of all this by the enchantress, who herself related to me the effects of her rage. Nor was even this all. Her fury is not satiated by the destruction of my empire and the enchantment of myself, no, for she comes every day and gives me 100 blows upon my shoulders, and with a thong made of a bull's hide, drawing blood at every stroke. As soon as she has finished this punishment, she covers me with coarse stuff made of goat's hair, and puts a robe of rich brocade on me, not for the sake of honoring me, but to mock my despair. As he said this, the young king of the Black Isles could not refrain from tears, and the Sultan's heart was so oppressed that he could offer him no consolation. The young king then, lifting up his eyes towards heaven, exclaimed, I submit, O powerful creator of all things, to thy judgments and to the decrees of thy providence. Since it is thy pleasure, I patiently suffer every evil, yet I trust thy infinite goodness will one day recompense me. The Sultan was much affected by the recital of this strange story, and felt eager to revenge the unfortunate king's injuries. Inform me where this perfidious enchantress resides, and also where is this infamous paramour, whom she has entombed before his death. Ah, my lord, he, as I have mentioned before, is at the Palace of Tears, in a tomb formed like a dome, and the building has a communication with the capital in the direction of the entrance. I cannot exactly tell you to what spot the enchantress has retired, but she visits her lover every day at sunrise, after having inflicted on me the cruel punishment I have described, and you may easily judge that I cannot defend myself from such inhumanity. She always brings with her a sort of liquor, which is the only thing that can keep him alive, you see. And she never ceases to complain of his silence, which he has kept unbroken since he was wounded. No one, Prince, deserves a greater commiseration than yourself, nor can anyone sympathize more in your misfortune than I do. A more extraordinary fate never happened to any man, and they who may hereafter compose your history will be able to relate any event more surprising than anything yet recorded. One thing only is wanting to complete it, and that is your revenge. Your revenge. Nor will I leave anything untried to accomplish this end. The Sultan, having first informed the prince of his own name and rank, and of any reason of his entering the castle, consulted with him on the best means of accomplishing just such a revenge. And a plan occurred to the Sultan, which he directly communicated. They agreed upon the steps it was necessary to take in order to ensure success, and they deferred the execution of the plan to the following day. In the meantime, as the night was far advanced, the Sultan took some repose. The young prince, as usual, passed his time in continued wakefulness, for he had been unable to sleep since his enchantment. But now the hopes, however slight, which he cherished of being soon relieved from his sufferings, constantly occupied his thoughts. The Sultan arose as soon as it was day, and concealing in his bedchamber his robe and external dress which might have encumbered him, he went to the Palace of Tears. He found it illuminated by a multitude of torches of white wax, and became conscious of a delicious perfume issuing from various beautiful golden vases, regularly arranged. As soon as he perceived the bed on which the wounded man was lying, he drew his saber and destroyed without resistance the little life that remained in that wretch. He then dragged the body into the court of the castle, and he threw it into a well. Having done this, he returned and lay down in the former lover's place, hiding his saber under the coverlid, where there he watched to complete the revenge he meditated. The enchantress arrived soon after. Her first business was to go into the apartment in which she had immured her husband, the king of the Black Isles. She directly stripped him and began with a horrible barbarity to inflict upon his shoulders the accustomed number of blows. The poor prince filled the whole building with his cries, and conjured her in the most pathetic manner to have pity on him. This cruel enchantress, however, ceased not to beat him till she completed the 100 stripes. "Thou hadst no compassion on my lover, therefore expect none from me." As soon as she had finished her cruel work,
She threw over him the coarse garment made of goat skin, covering this with the body with the robe of the brocade. She next went to the Palace of Tears, and on entering began to renew her lamentations. When she approached the couch where she thought to find her lover, she exclaimed, "Alas, what cruelty to have thus destroyed the tranquil joy of so tender and fond a mistress as I am! Merciless prince, thou reproachest me with being inhuman, and when I make thee feel the effects of my resentment, hast thou not by barbarity far exceeded my revenge? Hast thou not, traitor, in destroying almost the existence of this adorable object, equally destroyed mine? Alas," added she, addressing herself to the Sultan, whom she took for her lover, "will you always, light of my life, thus keep silence? Are you resolved to let me die without the consolation of hearing you again declare your love me? Utter at least one word, I conjure you." And then the Sultan, pretending to awake from a profound sleep, and imitating the language of the folks there, answered the Queen in a solemn tone, "There is no strength or power but in Allah alone, who is all-powerful." At these words the enchantress, who never expected to hear her lover speak, gave a violent scream for very joy. "My dear lord, do you deceive me? Is what I hear true? Is it really you who speak?" "Wretched woman," replied the Sultan, "are you worthy of an answer?" "What? Do you reproach me?" "The cries, the tears, the groans of thy husband," answered her supposed lover, "whom you every day torture with so much barbarity, continually disturb my rest. I should have been cured long since, and should have recovered the use of my tongue if you had disenchanted him. This and this only is the cause of my silence, which you so bitterly complain." "Why then, to satisfy you, I am ready to do what you command. Do you wish him to be restored to his former shape?" "Yes, I do, and hasten to set him free, that I may no longer be disturbed by his cries." The Queen immediately went out from the Palace of Tears, and taking a vessel of water, she pronounced over it some words, which caused it to instantly boil, as if it had been placed in a fire. She proceeded to the apartment of the young king, where her husband was. "If the Creator of all things," said she, throwing the water over him, "hath formed thee as thou now art, or if he is angry with thee, be not changed. But if thou art in this state by virtues of my enchantment, take back thy natural form, and become as thou wert before." She had hardly concluded when the prince, recovering his first shape, rose up with all possible joy and returned thanks to God. "Go," said the enchantress, addressing him. "Hasten from this castle, never return, lest it should cost you your life. Find something else to do, perhaps take up scrapbooking." The young king yielded to necessity, and left the Queen without uttering a word. He concealed himself in a secure spot, where he impatiently waited the completion of the Sultan's design, and the commencement of which had been so successful. The enchantress then returned to the Palace of Tears, and on entering said to the Sultan, whom she still mistook for her lover, "I have done, my love, what you ordered me. Nothing, therefore, now prevents your getting up and affording me the satisfaction I have so long been deprived of." The Sultan, still imitating the language of them, answered in somewhat severe tone, "What you have yet done is not sufficient for my cure. You have destroyed only a part of the evil, but you must strike at the root." "Oh, what do you mean by these words, my charming friend?" asked she. "What can I mean? But the city and its inhabitants, the 4 isles, which you have destroyed by your magic. Every day towards midnight the fish raise their heads out of the pond, and cry for vengeance against us both. This is the real cause of why my recovery is so long delayed. Go quickly, re-establish everything in its former state, and on your return I will give you my hand, and you shall assist me in rising." The Queen, exulting in the expectations of these words, joyfully exclaimed, "You shall soon, then, my love, recover your health. Oh, for I will instantly go and do what you have commanded." In fact, she went that very instant, and when she arrived on the border of the pond, she took a little water in her hand. She scattered it about. So soon as she had done this, and pronounced certain words over the fish in the pond, the city reappeared. And the fish became men, women, and children. All arose as the Mohammedans, the Christians, the Persians, the Jews, freemen came forth, and slaves. In short, each took his former shape. The houses and the shops became filled with inhabitants who found all things in the same situation in order which they had been previous to the change effected by the Queen's enchantments. It was as though a sim had crashed and then been reborn and re-resed, and everything was back as it was. The officers and attendants of the Sultan, who had happened to camp upon the site of the great square, were astonished at finding themselves on a sudden in the midst of a large, well-built and populous city. But to return to the enchantress. As soon as she had completed this change, she hastened back to the Palace of Tears to enjoy the rewards of her labors. "My dear lord, I have returned to participate in the pleasure of your renewed health, for I have done all you have required of me. Arise and give me your hand." "Come near, then," said the Sultan, still imitating the manner of the Indian. She did so. "Nearer still," she obeyed, and then, raising himself up, he seized her so suddenly by the arms that she had no opportunity of perceiving how she had been deceived, and with one stroke of his sabre he separated her body into two parts, which fell on each side of him. Having done this, he left the corpses, where it fell, and went to seek the Prince of the Black Isle, who was waiting with the greatest impatience for him. "Rejoice, Prince," said he. "You have nothing more to fear, for your cruel enemy exists no longer. She perished of a splitting headache." The young prince thanked the Sultan in a way which proved that his heart was truly penetrated with gratitude, and wished his deliverer, as a reward for the important service he had rendered him, a long life and greatest prosperity. "May you too live happily and at peace in your castle," replied the Sultan. "And should you there hereafter have a wish to visit mine, which is so near, I shall receive you with truest pleasure, and you shall be as highly honored and respected in your own." "Powerful monarch," answered the prince, "to whom I am so much now indebted, do you think you are very near your capital?" "Certainly," replied the Sultan. "I presume at least that I am not more than 4 or 5 hours' journey from thence." "It is a whole year's journey," said the prince, "although I believe you might come here in that time you mentioned, because my city was enchanted. But since it has been restored, all this is altered. This, however, shall not prevent my following you, were it necessary to go to the very ends of the earth. You are my liberator, and to show you every mark of my gratitude, as long as I live, I shall freely accompany you and resign my kingdom without regret." Now, the Sultan was extremely surprised to find that he was indeed so distant from his dominions, and could not comprehend how it happened. But the young king of the Black Isles convinced him so fully of the fact that he no longer doubted it. "Well, it matters not," resumed the Sultan. "The trouble of returning to my dominions will be sufficiently recompensed by the satisfaction of having assisted you and having gained a son in you. For as you will do me the honor to accompany me, I shall look upon you as my son, and as I am childless, I from this moment make you my heir and successor." Now this interview between the Sultan and the King of the Black Isles was terminated by the most affectionate embraces, and the young prince at once prepared for his journeys. In 3 weeks' time, which will be a mere 2.5 minutes before this story is done, he was ready to depart, greatly regretted by his court and subjects, who received at his hands a near relation of his own king. At length the Sultan and the prince set out, with 100 camels laden with inestimable riches, which had been selected from the treasury of the young king, who was moreover accompanied by 50 handsome nobles, well mounted and equipped. The journey was a pleasant one, and when the Sultan, who had dispatched the couriers to give notice of his arrival, explained the reason of his delay, drew near to his capital, the principal officers whom he had left there came to receive him, to assure him that this long absence had not occasioned any change in his empire. The inhabitants also crowded to meet him and welcomed him with acclamations, and every demonstration of joy. The rejoicings were continued for several days. And the day after his arrival, the Sultan assembled his courtiers and gave them ample details of the occurrences which, contrary to his wishes, had delayed his return. He then declared to them his intention of adopting the king of the 4 Black Isles, who had left a large kingdom to accompany and live with him. And lastly, to reward the fidelity with which they served him, he bestowed presents on all, according to each man's rank and station. Now, with regard to the fisherman, as he had been the first cause of the deliverance of the young prince, the Sultan overwhelmed him with rewards, made him and his family happy and prosperous for the rest of their days.